there comes a moment in life that almost no one talks about. A moment when the noise finally stops. When the messages don't come. When the people you leaned on are suddenly gone. And you're left alone, not in a dramatic way, not in a cinematic way, but in a quiet, unsettling stillness that forces one terrifying question to surface: if no one is here, who am I now? That moment doesn't arrive with warnings. It comes late at night, on empty drives, in crowded cities where no one truly sees you. And for many people, that moment feels like collapse. But what if that moment isn't breaking you? What if it's revealing you? What if the emptiness you feel isn't proof that you need someone else, but proof that you're standing at the doorway of the strongest version of yourself, the version that no longer begs, clings, or fears being alone? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear may quietly change the way you see love, loneliness, and your own power forever. Before we begin, if this message speaks to something deep inside you, subscribe to Buddhism in every moment. Your support helps us continue creating calm, honest, and life-changing reflections like this, one moment, one truth at a time. Now let's begin. Part 1: The quiet crisis nobody talks about. Why so many successful lives still feel empty. There is a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself with tears or chaos or visible collapse. It moves quietly through the lives of people who appear fine. People with careers. People with families. People with social calendars that look full from the outside. And yet, when the day ends, when the doors close, when the world finally goes silent, something inside them feels hollow. Not broken. Not dramatic. Just strangely empty. This is the quiet crisis nobody talks about. Because how do you explain a pain that exists even when nothing is technically wrong? You have people in your life. You have conversations, connections, obligations. You show up. You perform. You smile at the right moments. But somewhere beneath all of that, there is a subtle exhaustion that never fully leaves. A feeling that no amount of company, affection, or attention seems to settle for long. A sense that the moment people pull away, even slightly, your inner balance begins to shake. And what makes this crisis so powerful is not the pain itself, but the confusion around it. You tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way. You remind yourself that others have it worse. You push forward, assuming the emptiness will eventually disappear if you stay busy enough, connected enough, needed enough. But it doesn't. Because the emptiness was never caused by lack of people. It was caused by something much deeper and much harder to face. Most people in modern society were never taught how to be with themselves. They were taught how to socialize, how to succeed, how to be desirable, productive, useful, likable. But they were never taught how to sit alone with their own thoughts without needing distraction. How to feel emotions without immediately reaching for someone else to absorb them. How to ground their sense of worth in something that does not disappear the moment attention fades. Instead, from an early age, connection became a substitute for inner stability. Approval became reassurance. Presence became safety. Being chosen became proof of worth. And over time, something subtle but dangerous happened. The mind quietly learned, I am okay when someone is here. I am valuable when someone responds. I am safe when someone stays. This belief doesn't form loudly. It forms gently. It blends into culture. It hides behind romance, ambition, social norms, even self-improvement. In American culture especially, connection is often framed as the solution to everything. Feeling lost? Find your people. Feeling lonely? Get into a relationship. Feeling insecure? Surround yourself with support. And while connection is not wrong, this narrative leaves out a crucial truth. If your sense of completeness depends on people, then your peace will always be fragile. Because people are unpredictable. They get busy. They change. They misunderstand. They leave. And every time they do, something inside you collapses, not because they failed you, but because your inner foundation was built on external ground. This is why so many people feel anxious the moment silence appears. A delayed reply can ruin an entire day. A shift in tone can trigger spirals of self-doubt. A relationship ending can feel like losing your identity, not just a person. The pain feels unbearable because it's not just loss, it's disorientation. When someone who anchored your emotional world disappears, the question that surfaces is not why did they leave, but who am I without them? And that question terrifies most people. So they avoid it. They fill the space with noise. They scroll. They text. They talk. They keep themselves constantly occupied, so they never have to sit still long enough to hear the truth rising inside them. But the truth doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits in quiet moments, in late nights, in long drives, in the strange emptiness that follows even the most social weekends. And the truth is this: you were taught to rely on people for emotional completion, but never taught how to build it within yourself. This is not a personal failure. It is a cultural inheritance. Modern life rewards dependence disguised as connection. It praises being needed, being wanted, being constantly engaged. And subtly, it teaches that being alone is a problem to fix rather than a state to understand. But Buddhism offers a radically different perspective. It does not ask, who will complete you? It asks, why do you believe you are incomplete? This single question challenges everything most people have built their emotional lives upon. Because if you look closely, you begin to notice something unsettling. Even when people are present, the emptiness often remains. Even when relationships are stable, the fear of loss lingers. Even when validation is given, it needs to be given again and again and again. This is the hidden cost of emotional dependency. It never allows rest. You are always monitoring, always interpreting, always adjusting yourself based on how others respond. You become emotionally outsourced, your inner state, constantly regulated by forces outside your control. And slowly, without realizing it, you drift further away from yourself. Your inner voice becomes quieter. Your instincts become duller. Your ability to self-soothe weakens. Not because you are broken, but because you have never been asked to practice being whole on your own. This is why the quiet crisis feels so disorienting. It is not the pain of loneliness. It is the pain of disconnection from your inner world. A disconnection so deep that when external support fades, there is nothing solid to return to. And yet, within this crisis lies something most people never recognize. The emptiness is not your enemy. It is an invitation. An invitation to stop running outward for completion. An invitation to stop using people as emotional lifelines. An invitation to finally build a relationship with yourself that does not collapse under silence. But this invitation is uncomfortable, because turning inward requires courage most people were never taught to develop. It requires sitting with emotions without immediately explaining them away. It requires allowing discomfort to exist without numbing it. It requires letting the illusion fall that someone else is responsible for holding you together. This is why the quiet crisis often arrives when people are already successful. Because once external goals are met, distractions weaken. Once achievements stabilize, the noise softens, and the inner world long neglected finally demands attention. Some respond by chasing more relationships, more stimulation, more validation. Others respond by slowing down. And it is the second group, quiet, often misunderstood, who begin to discover something profound. That the emptiness they feared was not a sign of lack, but a sign of readiness. readiness to build something deeper than attention, readiness to find peace that does not fluctuate with presence, readiness to become emotionally sovereign rather than emotionally dependent. Buddhism does not promise that this path will feel easy. It promises something more honest, that when you stop depending on people to feel complete, you will feel exposed at first, unprotected, raw. But slowly, something shifts. The silence that once felt threatening begins to feel spacious. The absence that once triggered panic begins to feel neutral and then safe. The need to be constantly seen begins to loosen its grip. And in that space, you begin to encounter yourself, not the version shaped by reactions and expectations, but the quieter version that exists beneath them. The version that does not require applause to exist. The version that does not collapse when left alone. The version that has always been there, waiting patiently for you to stop outsourcing your worth. This is where the quiet crisis transforms. What once felt like emptiness becomes stillness. What once felt like abandonment becomes independence. What once felt like loss becomes clarity. But none of this can happen if you keep running from the silence. Part 1 is not about solutions. It is about recognition. Recognition that the pain you feel may not be asking for more people, but for deeper presence with yourself. Recognition that needing others to feel complete is not love, it is survival conditioning. And recognition that the discomfort you are avoiding may be the very doorway through which your real strength enters. Because the truth is simple, but not easy. You cannot build an unshakable life on external foundations. And until you learn how to be whole in silence, every connection will carry the weight of a responsibility it was never meant to bear. This is the crisis. And this is the beginning. Part 2, when silence feels uncomfortable, it's doing its job. Why silence is the most honest teacher you'll ever meet. Silence has a strange reputation. In modern life, it is often treated as something awkward, heavy, even dangerous. We rush to fill it the moment it appears. We turn on music. We reach for our phones. We start conversations that don't need to happen. Anything at all, to avoid that empty space where nothing is happening and no one is speaking. But silence is not empty. It is precise. And that is exactly why it makes people uncomfortable. Silence does not distract you. It does not reassure you. It does not flatter you or soften the truth. Silence shows you what remains when everything external falls away. This is why so many people fear it without knowing why. Because in silence, there is no audience to perform for, no role to play, no immediate feedback to tell you who you are supposed to be. There is only you, sitting with yourself, exposed to your own thoughts, emotions, and memories, many of which have been avoided for years. When silence arrives, it doesn't bring anything new. It simply removes what was hiding what was already there. And what it reveals is often unsettling. Unprocessed grief, unacknowledged anger, a quiet dissatisfaction you never had time to name, a sense that you have been living slightly misaligned with your own values. None of these appear because silence created them. They appear because silence removed the noise that kept them buried. In a world that rewards constant stimulation, silence feels like a threat to the identity we've built. We are used to defining ourselves by what we do, who we interact with, how productive or responsive we are. Silence interrupts that narrative. It pauses the momentum. It asks nothing of you except one thing: honesty. This is why the first moments of silence are often uncomfortable. Your mind doesn't suddenly become calm. It becomes loud. Thoughts rush in. Regrets, worries, unfinished conversations replay themselves. Questions you've been postponing rise to the surface. The silence becomes crowded with everything you've been running from. And at this point, most people assume something is wrong. They think, I shouldn't feel this restless. They think, I'm bad at being alone. They think, silence is making me anxious. But silence is not the problem. Silence is revealing the problem. Buddhism has always treated silence differently than modern culture does. It does not see silence as absence. It sees silence as space. A space where awareness sharpens. A space where truth becomes visible. A space where the mind finally has nowhere to hide. In silence, the mind begins to show you its patterns. You start to notice how quickly it jumps to distraction. How uncomfortable it is without stimulation. How often it seeks reassurance, validation, or escape. These patterns usually operate quietly in the background of daily life, masked by activity. But when the noise fades, they become impossible to ignore. This is not punishment. This is information. Silence teaches you how dependent your mind has become on external input to feel stable. It shows you how often you reach outward instead of inward. It exposes the habit of needing someone to lean on emotionally. And for many people, this realization is deeply uncomfortable. Because it challenges a belief they've carried for a long time that peace comes from being occupied, connected, or entertained. Silence dismantles that belief. It shows you that constant movement is not the same as inner stability. That being surrounded is not the same as being grounded. That noise can keep you busy, but it cannot keep you whole. This is why silence feels threatening at first. It removes the illusion that everything is fine just because life is full. In silence, you begin to see the cost of avoidance. You see how much energy you've spent distracting yourself from yourself. How many decisions were made not from clarity, but from discomfort. How often you said yes to things simply to avoid sitting alone with your thoughts. Silence does not judge this. It simply shows it to you. And here is where many people turn back. They label silence as too much. They decide they are not ready. They return to noise and call it self-care. But the ones who stay, the ones who resist the urge to escape, begin to experience something subtle and transformative. After the initial discomfort, something shifts. The thoughts begin to slow, not because you forced them to, but because you stopped running from them. The emotions soften. Not because they disappeared, but because they were finally allowed to exist without resistance. And in this quieter state, you begin to hear something that was always present, but rarely noticed: your own inner voice. Not the anxious voice that reacts. Not the critical voice that judges. But the deeper voice beneath them. The one that knows when something feels off. The one that recognizes when you are betraying yourself. The one that understands what you actually need, not what you've been conditioned to want. This voice does not shout. It does not compete with noise. It waits. Silence is the only environment where it can be heard. This is why silence has the power to change people in ways no advice ever could. It doesn't tell you what to do. It allows you to see what you already know, but haven't been listening to. In silence, clarity emerges naturally. You begin to realize which relationships drain you and which nourish you. Which goals are genuinely yours and which were inherited from expectation. Which habits keep you numb and which bring you peace. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to recognize how much of your suffering comes not from your circumstances, but from your resistance to being alone with yourself. This realization can feel sobering, because it means that no amount of external change will fully heal what has been avoided internally. New relationships won't fix it. New achievements won't silence it. New distractions will only postpone it. Silence, however, does not postpone. It stays. And the longer you remain in it, the more something profound begins to happen. You start to develop tolerance not for pain, but for presence. You learn that you can sit with discomfort without being consumed by it. that you can feel emotions without needing to immediately act on them. That anxiety does not require escape, it requires attention. This is emotional maturity in its earliest form. Not the ability to suppress feelings, but the ability to stay with them. Silence trains this ability quietly, patiently, without force. Over time, the silence that once felt unbearable begins to feel spacious. The stillness that once triggered restlessness begins to feel grounding. You stop needing to fill every gap. You stop fearing the absence of stimulation. And something unexpected emerges: trust. Trust in your ability to be with yourself. Trust in your capacity to handle your inner world. Trust that you are not as fragile as you once believed. This trust does not come from positive thinking. It comes from experience. From sitting in silence and realizing you did not break. From facing thoughts you feared and seeing they passed. From feeling emotions fully and noticing they softened on their own. Silence becomes proof. Proof that you do not need constant noise to survive. Proof that you are capable of holding yourself. Proof that your inner world, while complex, is not unmanageable. This is why Buddhism treats silence as sacred. Not because silence is pleasant, but because it is honest. It strips away what is unnecessary. It reveals what is essential. It prepares the ground for transformation. And yet, silence does not rush this process. It does not demand immediate answers. It does not force conclusions. It simply creates space. Space for awareness. Space for healing. Space for truth to surface in its own time. In this space, you begin to notice something subtle but powerful. The need for external validation weakens. The urgency to be seen, heard, or affirmed begins to fade. Not because you no longer value connection, but because you are no longer starving for it. Silence nourishes something inside you that noise never could. It reconnects you with your inner center. And when that center strengthens, everything else in life shifts around it. You become less reactive, less dependent on immediate reassurance, less shaken by the absence of others. This does not make you distant or cold. It makes you grounded. You stop using people to regulate your emotions. You stop expecting the world to constantly reflect your worth. You stop panicking when things go quiet. Because quiet no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like home. This is the hidden gift of silence. It does not add anything to your life. It removes what was blocking you from yourself. And once you experience this, even briefly, you begin to understand why running from silence kept you stuck for so long. Silence was never trying to take something away from you. It was trying to give you back to yourself. This is why, when silence feels uncomfortable, it is doing its job. It is inviting you into a deeper relationship with your own mind. It is asking you to stop outsourcing your sense of safety. It is preparing you for a strength that cannot be shaken by noise, absence, or change. And if you allow it, truly allow it, silence will not break you, it will rebuild you. Part 3: The addiction no one warned you about. Emotional dependency disguised as love. There is an addiction that almost no one calls by its real name. It doesn't come in bottles. It isn't illegal. It is praised, romanticized, and even encouraged. It is emotional dependency. And the most dangerous thing about it is this: most people believe it is love. I want to say this clearly, even if it makes some people uncomfortable, because clarity matters more than comfort. If your sense of peace collapses when someone pulls away, if your worth rises and falls based on how someone treats you, if your emotional stability depends on another person's presence, that is not love. That is attachment dressed up as devotion. That is dependency hiding behind affection. And in my honest opinion, this misunderstanding is one of the deepest sources of emotional suffering in modern life. We are taught, subtly and repeatedly, that needing someone deeply is proof of connection, that missing someone intensely means you care, that feeling incomplete without someone is romantic. But Buddhism teaches something radically different. It teaches that anything you need, in order to feel whole, will eventually control you. And this truth applies especially to people. Emotional dependency begins quietly. It doesn't announce itself as weakness. It often starts with something that feels beautiful. Someone sees you. Someone listens. Someone makes you feel safe in a way you haven't felt before. And for the first time in a long time, the noise in your mind softens. The relief is powerful. So powerful that your nervous system starts associating that person with peace. Their presence becomes regulation. Their attention becomes reassurance. Their validation becomes emotional oxygen. And slowly, almost invisibly, something shifts. You stop turning inward when you feel unsettled. You start reaching outward. You wait for their message to calm your anxiety. You rely on their tone to determine your mood. You look to their reactions to confirm your value. At this point, you may still call it love. But love does not demand oxygen from another person to survive. Dependency does. I believe one of the most honest questions a person can ask themselves is this: if this person disappeared tomorrow, would I still feel like myself? If the answer is no, then something important has been outsourced. And here is the painful part, because it deserves to be said with honesty, not judgment. Most people do not become emotionally dependent because they are weak. They become dependent because they were never taught how to meet their own emotional needs. They were taught how to be there for others, how to support, how to show up, but not how to sit with sadness without panic, not how to soothe fear without reassurance, not how to feel worthy without reflection from another person. So when someone enters their life who provides that stability externally, it feels like salvation. And that is where the addiction forms. Because the mind learns this person makes me feel okay. Without them, I am not okay. This belief is never questioned, only reinforced. And over time, love becomes mixed with fear. Fear of loss. Fear of change. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of being too much or not enough. You begin managing yourself to keep the connection stable. You shrink parts of yourself to avoid conflict. You tolerate behavior that quietly hurts you. Not because you don't see it, but because losing the person feels worse than losing yourself. This is the cost of emotional dependency. And here is my personal stance. Stated plainly, any connection that requires you to abandon your inner balance is not a healthy connection, no matter how intense it feels. Intensity is not depth. Attachment is not intimacy. Need is not love. Love, in its healthiest form, is spacious. It allows movement. It allows difference. It allows silence without panic. Dependency, on the other hand, tightens. It clings. It fears. And the mind confuses fear with passion. Buddhism teaches that attachment creates suffering not because people are bad, but because attachment places impossible responsibility on impermanent things. People change. Moods shift. Life pulls people in different directions. When your peace is tied to something that is constantly moving, instability is guaranteed. This is why emotionally dependent relationships feel like emotional roller coasters. High highs, low lows, relief followed by anxiety, closeness followed by panic. And the most exhausting part is not the conflict, it's the constant monitoring. You read between lines. You analyze pauses. You interpret energy. Your nervous system never rests. In my view, this is one of the clearest signs that love has been replaced by survival. Because when love is rooted in wholeness, it does not require vigilance, it requires presence. Another truth that is difficult but necessary: many people use relationships to avoid facing themselves. They attach not because they are deeply connected, but because being alone feels unsafe. They confuse connection with distraction. As long as someone is there, they don't have to confront their own inner emptiness, unresolved pain, or unanswered questions. But this avoidance comes at a cost. Because every time you depend on someone else to regulate your emotions, you weaken your ability to do it yourself. You lose emotional muscle. And then, when the person pulls away as people eventually do, you feel shattered, not because the relationship ended, but because your inner support system was never built. This is why breakups feel like identity loss for many people. They didn't just lose someone. They lost the structure holding them together. And again, this is not shameful. But it is something that must be seen clearly if healing is to happen. Buddhism does not tell you to stop loving. It tells you to stop clinging. There is a profound difference. To love without clinging means you care deeply without needing to control. You show up fully without demanding that the other person complete you. You allow connection to flow rather than trying to anchor your worth to it. This kind of love is rare not because it is difficult, but because it requires inner fullness. And inner fullness cannot be borrowed. It must be built. Here is a practical truth from real life. If someone's absence destroys your peace, then their presence was not love, it was emotional regulation. And no person should carry the responsibility of regulating another adult's inner world. That burden eventually suffocates both people. One becomes anxious and dependent. The other becomes pressured and drained. And slowly, resentment replaces affection. This is why many relationships that begin with intensity end with exhaustion. Not because love faded, but because dependency consumed it. From my perspective, one of the most liberating realizations a person can have is this: I can care deeply without needing. When you internalize this, something remarkable happens. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop begging for consistency. You stop fearing distance. Because your inner stability no longer depends on proximity. You begin to notice relationships more clearly. You observe behavior instead of projecting hope. You appreciate presence without panicking over absence. You choose connection rather than clinging to it. This shift is subtle, but powerful. It transforms relationships from emotional lifelines into genuine exchanges. And most importantly, it transforms you. You stop outsourcing your sense of self. You stop equating being chosen with being valuable. You stop collapsing when others change. You begin to feel anchored not to people, but to yourself. This is where freedom begins. Not the freedom of isolation, but the freedom of emotional independence. And here is the final truth I want to leave you with in this part, spoken plainly, without poetry. Love that costs you your inner peace is not love worth keeping. Real love does not require you to abandon yourself. Real love does not punish you with fear. Real love does not collapse in silence. Real love grows best when it is not asked to fill a void it did not create. When you stop confusing dependency for love, you don't lose connection. You gain clarity. And clarity, more than intensity, is what allows love to last without destroying you. Part 4: Learning to sit with yourself without running away. The skill nobody taught you growing up. There is a skill so essential to emotional strength that its absence quietly shapes almost every struggle people face as adults. And yet, almost no one was ever taught it. That skill is the ability to sit with yourself without running away. Not distracting. Not numbing. Not reaching outward for comfort, reassurance, or noise. Just being with yourself fully present when nothing is pulling you forward and no one is pulling you out of your own inner world. In my honest opinion, this single ability determines whether a person grows emotionally stronger with age or becomes increasingly fragile beneath a functional exterior. Most people never learn it. Instead, they learn avoidance. They learn how to stay busy, how to stay connected, how to stay stimulated. From an early age, discomfort is treated like a problem to eliminate rather than a signal to listen to. Boredom is filled. Sadness is distracted. Loneliness is fixed with company. Anxiety is drowned out with noise. So the nervous system never learns how to settle on its own. And this is where the real trouble begins. Because life eventually creates moments where you cannot escape yourself. Late at night when the house is quiet. On long drives when the road stretches endlessly ahead. In hotel rooms, empty apartments, quiet mornings, or the aftermath of emotional loss. And when those moments arrive, many people panic, not because something terrible is happening, but because they don't know how to stay. They have never practiced remaining present with discomfort without immediately trying to change it. I believe this is why so many people mistake restlessness for weakness. They think, something is wrong with me because I can't sit still. But the truth is simpler and more compassionate. You were never trained to. Learning to sit with yourself is not natural for a mind conditioned by constant stimulation. It is a practice. One that feels unnatural at first because it goes against everything modern life reinforces. When you first stop running, the mind resists. It throws thoughts at you. It replays old conversations. It pulls up fears, regrets, and unfinished emotions. And at that moment, most people conclude that being alone is bad for them. I disagree. In my view, that moment is the beginning of emotional education. Because what you are experiencing is not instability, it is exposure. Exposure to everything that has been carried silently while you were distracted. The mind is not trying to harm you. It is trying to be heard. When you sit with yourself without running, something uncomfortable but honest becomes clear. Much of what you have been avoiding is not unbearable, it is unfamiliar. Unfamiliar because you were never allowed to slow down long enough to feel it. This is why learning to be with yourself feels so raw at first. You are meeting parts of yourself that were ignored, rushed, or dismissed for years. And here is a truth that deserves to be stated clearly: avoidance does not make pain disappear. It makes pain louder when silence finally arrives. This is why distraction feels necessary at first. It keeps the volume down. But it also keeps you dependent. Because the moment the distraction is gone, the pain returns often stronger because it has never been processed. Sitting with yourself changes this dynamic completely. When you stay instead of escape, the nervous system begins to learn something new. It learns that discomfort is survivable. That emotions rise and fall on their own. That thoughts lose power when they are observed instead of chased. This learning does not happen through logic. It happens through experience. Through staying. Through breathing through moments you once avoided. Through feeling without immediately labeling the feeling as a problem. This is not easy work. And I want to be honest here, because romanticizing this process does more harm than good. Learning to sit with yourself can feel lonely before it feels peaceful. It can feel heavy before it feels grounding. It can feel chaotic before it feels clear. But this discomfort is not a sign you are doing it wrong. It is a sign you are doing something new. One of the most powerful shifts that occurs during this practice is the ability to self-soothe. Most adults rely on others for emotional regulation without realizing it. They need someone to talk them down, someone to reassure them, someone to distract them. There is nothing wrong with receiving support, but when support becomes a requirement for stability, resilience weakens. Learning to sit with yourself teaches you how to comfort yourself internally. You learn how to slow your breath when anxiety rises, how to soften your body when tension appears, How to stay present with sadness without drowning in it. In my opinion, this is real maturity. Not emotional numbness. Not constant positivity. But the ability to hold your own experience without collapsing. And once this ability develops, your relationship with the world changes. You no longer panic at quiet moments. You no longer chase company to avoid yourself. You no longer feel threatened by being alone. Because being alone no longer means being unsupported. You become your own support. There is something deeply empowering about realizing this. It shifts your posture toward life. You begin to approach relationships differently, not as emotional lifelines, but as shared experiences. You stop expecting others to fix your moods. You stop blaming others for your inner states. You stop handing over responsibility for your peace. This does not make you distant. It makes you whole. From my perspective, one of the most overlooked benefits of sitting with yourself is clarity. When you are constantly distracted, you cannot hear your own truth. Your intuition gets buried under noise. Your decisions become reactive instead of aligned. But when you slow down, patterns become visible. You start to notice what drains you, what excites you, what feels forced, what feels honest. And this awareness cannot be rushed. It emerges quietly, through repeated moments of presence. This is why short bursts of solitude matter so much. Not dramatic retreats, not extreme isolation, but simple, intentional moments. Sitting in a car without turning on the radio, drinking coffee without scrolling, walking without headphones. These moments train the nervous system to tolerate stillness, and tolerance slowly turns into comfort. Comfort turns into trust. Trust turns into strength. I want to emphasize something important here, something I believe deeply. Being able to sit with yourself is not about becoming emotionally invulnerable. It is about becoming emotionally available to yourself. Available when you are hurting. Available when you are confused. Available when you are afraid. Most people abandon themselves in these moments. They run outward. They look for escape. Learning to sit with yourself means you stop abandoning yourself. And when you stop abandoning yourself, a subtle but profound healing begins. You start to feel less desperate for reassurance, less anxious about silence, less reactive to emotional discomfort. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become steadier. This steadiness cannot be given by another person. It is built slowly, quietly, imperfectly. There will be days when sitting with yourself feels unbearable. Days when old wounds surface unexpectedly. Days when the urge to run feels overwhelming. Those days do not mean you are failing. They mean you are touching something real. And in my experience, touching something real, however uncomfortable, is always better than living numbed by distraction. Because every time you stay, even for a few seconds longer than before, you send a powerful message to yourself. I can handle my inner world. I do not need to escape to survive. I am capable of being here. That message changes everything. It becomes the foundation of emotional independence. And from that foundation, a new relationship with yourself emerges, one based not on avoidance, but on trust. This is the skill nobody taught you. But it is the skill that allows every other form of growth to take root. Because until you can sit with yourself without running away, you will always be searching for something outside to hold you together. And the moment you realize you can hold yourself, everything begins to change. Part 5: Solitude is not loneliness, it's training. How being alone builds emotional muscle. There is a misunderstanding so deeply woven into modern life that most people never question it. The misunderstanding is this: that being alone is a sign of lack, failure, or emotional weakness. That solitude means something is missing. That if no one is beside you, something must be wrong with you. I strongly disagree with this idea, and I want to say that clearly because this belief quietly destroys people. Solitude is not loneliness. Solitude is training. Loneliness is the feeling that you need someone else in order to feel whole. Solitude is the realization that you can stand on your own without collapsing. They are not the same experience, even though society treats them as if they are. Loneliness drains you. Solitude strengthens you. In my view, one of the greatest emotional lies ever sold is that strength comes from being surrounded. We are taught that community, companionship, and constant connection are the antidotes to pain. And while connection has value, the absence of inner strength turns even the best relationships into emotional crutches. Solitude exposes this truth. When you are alone, truly alone, without distraction, you begin to notice how much of your emotional stability used to come from external sources. Conversations, validation, presence, noise, movement. And at first, that realization can feel unsettling, because solitude removes the buffers. There is no one to distract you from your thoughts, no one to soften your emotions, no one to absorb the weight of your inner world. You are left with yourself. And for many people, this feels like punishment. But I believe this feeling is not punishment. It is resistance. Resistance from a nervous system that has never been asked to support itself. Think about physical strength for a moment. Muscles do not grow in comfort. They grow under resistance, under tension, under controlled stress. No one becomes physically strong by avoiding effort. Emotional strength works the same way, and solitude is the gym. Every moment you remain present with yourself instead of running, you are lifting emotional weight. Every time you feel an emotion without escaping it, you are strengthening your capacity to hold yourself together. This is why solitude feels uncomfortable at first. You are working muscles that have never been trained. Most people are emotionally undertrained, not because they are incapable, but because they were never given the opportunity to build strength without assistance. From an early age, support was always external. Parents soothed, friends distracted, partners regulated. And again, support itself is not the problem. The problem is when support becomes the only source of stability. Solitude removes that dependency. And in doing so, it gives you something far more valuable: self-reliance. I want to emphasize this point because it matters deeply. Self-reliance is not isolation. It is not emotional coldness. It is not refusing connection. Self-reliance is knowing that you will not fall apart when connection is absent. That knowledge changes how you move through the world. In solitude, you learn how to sit with anxiety without needing reassurance. You learn how to feel sadness without needing someone to fix it. You learn how to tolerate uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. These are not small skills. These are the foundations of emotional resilience. I've noticed something important in real life, and I want to be honest about it. People who are comfortable being alone tend to approach relationships with clarity. People who fear being alone tend to approach relationships with urgency. Urgency creates pressure. Pressure creates imbalance. Imbalance creates suffering. Solitude removes urgency. When you are no longer afraid of being alone, you stop forcing connections. You stop tolerating inconsistency. You stop negotiating your boundaries just to keep someone close. And this is where true strength begins to show. Not loud strength, not dominance, but quiet steadiness. Solitude teaches you how to be steady. It teaches you that emotions come and go, that thoughts lose intensity when observed, that silence does not kill you, it clarifies you. At first, solitude feels empty because you are used to filling every gap with something external. But over time, that emptiness reveals itself as space. Space to breathe, space to reflect, space to feel without interruption. And in that space, something unexpected happens. You begin to enjoy your own presence. This is not narcissism. This is not ego. This is familiarity. You become familiar with your rhythms, your thoughts, your needs. You stop treating yourself like a stranger who must be avoided. In my personal opinion, this is one of the most healing shifts a human being can experience. Because once you are comfortable with yourself, the world loses its power to destabilize you. Rejection hurts less. Silence frightens you less. Loss no longer feels like annihilation. Not because you stop caring, but because you stop depending. There is a profound difference. Solitude also teaches patience. When you are alone, there is nothing to rush toward and no one to perform for. You begin to notice how often you try to escape the present moment. How often you chase the next interaction, the next distraction, the next source of stimulation. Solitude slows this impulse down. It forces you to meet time as it is, not as you want it to be. And in that meeting, you begin to develop tolerance for stillness. Stillness is not inactivity. Stillness is presence without agitation. This presence is powerful. It grounds you. It allows you to respond instead of react, to choose instead of cling, to stay instead of panic. And this grounding becomes visible to others even if they can't explain it. People often describe emotionally strong individuals as calm, grounded, or secure. But what they are really sensing is solitude-trained stability. A person who has spent time alone without breaking carries themselves differently. They don't rush. They don't over-explain. They don't chase energy that isn't freely given. They are not afraid of space. And this lack of fear creates magnetism. Not because they are trying to attract, but because they are not trying to hold. In solitude, you also confront an important truth: you cannot outrun yourself. You can outrun people. You can outrun places. You can outrun conversations. But when you are alone, there is nowhere else to go. This confrontation can feel harsh, but it is also honest. It shows you what still needs attention, what still needs healing, what still needs compassion. And solitude gives you the time and space to address these things without external pressure. You are no longer performing healing. You are doing it. Slowly, imperfectly, quietly. I believe this quietness is essential, because real emotional strength does not announce itself. It builds invisibly. One moment of staying when you wanted to run. One moment of breathing instead of reacting. One moment of choosing presence over escape. These moments accumulate. And over time, you begin to notice that you no longer collapse the way you used to. Someone pulls away and you remain intact. Plans fall apart and you adapt. Life becomes uncertain and you stay grounded. This is not because you hardened yourself. It is because you trained yourself. Solitude did not isolate you. It prepared you to engage with life from fullness instead of fear. Prepared you to connect without clinging. Prepared you to love without losing yourself. And perhaps the most important lesson solitude teaches is this: you are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of not knowing how to be with yourself. Once you learn that skill, truly learn it, the fear dissolves. And what replaces it is something quietly powerful. Self-trust. The trust that you will be okay no matter who comes or goes. The trust that you can face your inner world without being overwhelmed. The trust that your peace is not dependent on external conditions. This trust changes everything. It changes how you love. It changes how you leave. It changes how you stand alone without feeling incomplete. Solitude, when embraced, does not weaken you. It makes you unshakable. And in a world that constantly tries to pull your attention outward, that kind of inner strength is not just rare. It is priceless. Part 6: Building an inner home no one can evict you from. Why belonging must start inside you. There is a quiet hunger that drives much of human behavior, yet very few people ever name it honestly. It is not the hunger for success. It is not the hunger for love. It is the hunger to belong, to feel safe somewhere, to feel understood without explanation, to feel like you have a place where you do not need to prove, impress, or perform. Most people spend their entire lives searching for this feeling outside themselves. They search for it in relationships, in families, in friendships, in careers, in communities, cities, ideologies, and identities. And when they find something that resembles it, they cling tightly, because losing that sense of belonging feels like being thrown back into emotional homelessness. In my view, this is one of the most painful and misunderstood struggles of adult life. Because what most people are really searching for is not a person or a place. They are searching for an inner home. And until that home is built within, no external space will ever feel secure for long. An inner home is not a metaphor meant to sound poetic. It is a psychological and emotional structure. It is the place inside you where you feel grounded, stable, and intact, regardless of who comes or goes. Without it, every relationship becomes a shelter, and shelters are fragile. When your sense of safety depends on others, you begin to tolerate what disturbs your peace simply to avoid being displaced. You stay where you are unseen. You remain where you are drained. You silence yourself where you should speak. Not because you don't know better, but because the fear of losing your place feels worse than the pain of staying. I want to say this clearly, because it matters deeply. Staying where you are disrespected is not loyalty. It is homelessness disguised as attachment. People who have not built an inner home will endure almost anything to avoid being alone. They will explain away neglect. They will justify inconsistency. They will shrink their needs until they disappear. And from the outside, it can look like commitment. But from the inside, it feels like abandonment, self-abandonment. An inner home changes this entirely. When you build an inner home, belonging stops being something you chase. It becomes something you carry. And this shift is life-altering. Because once you feel at home within yourself, you stop begging to be included. You stop forcing yourself into spaces where you are not valued. You stop confusing proximity with safety. You begin to understand something quietly powerful. It is better to stand alone in self-respect than to belong somewhere by betraying yourself. In my personal opinion, this realization marks the beginning of true adulthood. Not age, not responsibility, but self-respect. Building an inner home starts with self-awareness. You cannot feel at home within yourself if you do not know who you are. And most people don't, not because they lack depth, but because they have spent years shaping themselves around external expectations. They learned who to be liked, who to be accepted, who to avoid conflict. And in the process, their natural self became quiet. Solitude begins to undo this conditioning, but an inner home requires more than awareness. It requires emotional discipline. Emotional discipline does not mean suppressing feelings. It means learning how to respond to them without chaos. It means learning how to calm yourself without external reassurance. How to motivate yourself without pressure. How to comfort yourself without distraction. This is where many people struggle. Because emotional discipline feels lonely at first. No one is clapping. No one is validating the effort. No one is telling you that you're doing it right. And yet, this is the work that changes everything. Every time you choose not to reach outward for immediate comfort, you place another brick in your inner home. Every time you sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, the foundation strengthens. Slowly, quietly, stability forms. Another essential part of an inner home is self-respect. And I want to be honest here, because this is where many people avoid the truth. You cannot build an inner home if you continue to tolerate what violates your values. Self-respect is not a personality trait. It is a set of decisions. It is choosing to walk away from conversations that degrade you. It is choosing not to stay where your boundaries are repeatedly ignored. It is choosing your peace even when it costs you access to people you care about. This is difficult, because walking away often triggers fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of regret. Fear of not finding anything better. But here is what I believe with certainty: staying where you are disrespected erodes your inner home faster than being alone ever could. An inner home also requires boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with locks. They determine who has access to your energy, your time, and your emotional space. Without boundaries, your inner home becomes a public space. Anyone can enter. Anyone can leave damage behind. With boundaries, your inner home becomes protected. You learn when to say no without guilt, when to disengage without explanation, when to prioritize your well-being over social comfort. This does not make you selfish. It makes you grounded. I have noticed something important about people who have built an inner home. They move differently. They are not rushed. They are not desperate. They are not afraid of being misunderstood. They do not over-explain themselves. They do not chase approval. They do not cling to roles that cost them their peace. They know where they belong inside themselves. And because of this, they are selective. Not cold, not closed, but intentional. They choose relationships that feel mutual, not draining. They choose environments that support their values, not test their worth. And when something no longer aligns, they leave not with anger, but with clarity. This clarity comes from knowing that home is not something they will lose. They carry it. I want to emphasize a belief I hold strongly: no one should be the place where you feel safe if you are unsafe with yourself. Relying on others for belonging creates emotional dependence. Building an inner home creates emotional independence. And independence does not isolate you, it stabilizes you. When you feel at home within yourself, relationships become lighter. You stop demanding that others fill emotional gaps. You stop expecting them to rescue you from discomfort. You show up as someone who wants connection, not someone who needs it to survive. This changes everything. It changes the quality of love you offer, the standards you uphold, the way you respond to loss. Loss no longer feels like exile. It feels like transition, because you are not losing your foundation. You are simply changing your surroundings. This is one of the most freeing realizations a human being can have. You stop fearing abandonment because you no longer abandon yourself. You stop chasing belonging because you already have it. And from this place, something remarkable happens. The world begins to meet you differently. People who respect themselves tend to be respected. People who protect their peace attract healthier dynamics. People who know when to walk away stop being taken for granted. Not because they demand better treatment, but because they no longer accept less. An inner home also gives you something else that is often overlooked: dignity. Dignity in how you leave. Dignity in how you say no. Dignity in how you stand alone without bitterness. This dignity is felt by others, even if they cannot articulate it. It comes from alignment, from knowing that your outer life is no longer built on inner compromise. And yes, building an inner home is slow. There will be moments when loneliness resurfaces. Moments when you question your decisions. Moments when staying alone feels heavier than staying somewhere that hurts. Those moments are part of the process. They are not signs you are wrong. They are signs you are no longer avoiding discomfort at the cost of your integrity. And integrity, quiet, steady integrity, is the strongest foundation any inner home can have. Because once your inner world is built on self-awareness, emotional discipline, self-respect, and boundaries, something extraordinary happens. You stop begging to belong anywhere. You walk into rooms without shrinking. You leave spaces without guilt. You love without losing yourself. And no matter where you go, no matter who stays or leaves, there is a place you always return to. Yourself. That is the inner home. And once it is built, no one can evict you from it. Part 7. The freedom that comes when you stop explaining yourself. Why peace begins when you drop the need to be understood. There is a quiet exhaustion that lives inside people who are always explaining themselves. It shows up at the end of long conversations where nothing was actually resolved. In the silence after messages rewritten 10 times to sound right. In the tension that lingers after you've justified your choices, your boundaries, your absence, your growth, only to still feel misunderstood. This exhaustion is not physical. It is emotional. And in my opinion, it is one of the most overlooked sources of inner unrest in adult life. Most people don't realize how much energy they lose trying to be understood. They think they are communicating. They think they are being responsible. They think they are preventing conflict. But what they are often doing is something far more damaging. They are outsourcing their peace to other people's perceptions. I want to say this clearly, because it deserves emphasis. The need to constantly explain yourself is not clarity. It is insecurity disguised as responsibility. That may sound harsh at first, but it is an honest observation of how the human mind works. When you feel compelled to explain every decision, every silence, every boundary, what you are really saying beneath the words is, "This, I need you to see me the way I see myself, or I will not feel at peace." And that is a heavy burden to place on anyone. Here is a truth many people avoid: being misunderstood is not the problem. Needing to be understood by everyone is. People do not experience reality as it is. They experience it through the lens of their own fears, wounds, expectations, and limitations. No amount of explanation can override that. You can speak calmly. You can choose your words carefully. You can show patience and kindness, and still be misunderstood. This is not a failure of communication. It is a reality of being human. In my personal view, one of the most freeing realizations a person can have is this: not everyone is meant to understand you, and that is not a flaw in you. Some people are committed not consciously, but emotionally to misunderstanding, because understanding you would require them to confront parts of themselves they are not ready to face. Explaining yourself to such people is not communication. It is self-erasure. And the cost of this erasure accumulates quietly over time. You start to doubt your instincts. You second-guess your feelings. You soften your truth to make it easier for others to digest. Eventually, you begin to live slightly disconnected from yourself. Not dramatically. Just enough to feel tired all the time. This is why Buddhism speaks so deeply about detachment, not only from people, but from the need to be seen in a certain way. Attachment to being understood creates suffering. Because the moment your peace depends on someone else's interpretation of you, your inner world becomes unstable. Think about how many times you have replayed conversations in your mind. What you should have said. How you should have explained it better. How you wish they would finally get it. This mental repetition is not harmless. It keeps you emotionally tethered to other people's opinions. And opinions are unstable ground. They shift with mood, with context, with personal bias. Building your peace on them is like building a house on sand. I believe that maturity begins when you accept a difficult truth. Some people will misunderstand you, no matter how clearly you speak. And once you accept this, something inside you relaxes. You stop performing. You stop over-justifying. You stop trying to manage how you are perceived. Not because you stop caring, but because you start caring about something more important. Your inner alignment. There is a difference between being honest and being explanatory. Honesty is grounded. Explanation is defensive. Honesty says, "This is who I am." Explanation says, "Please approve of who I am." And the second one is exhausting. In real life, I've noticed that people who are at peace rarely over-explain. They speak clearly, but briefly. They set boundaries without speeches. They allow others to think what they think. This does not come from arrogance. It comes from self-trust. They trust that their intentions do not need constant translation. They trust that those who truly care will understand through consistency, not justification. And those who don't will drift away. This drifting is not loss. It is filtration. When you stop explaining yourself, your circle becomes smaller but stronger. People who required explanations to respect you begin to disappear. People who needed access to your energy without accountability lose interest. And people who resonate with your truth without needing you to dilute it remain. This is not coincidence. It is alignment. I want to emphasize something here, because it is often misunderstood. Stopping explanations does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means becoming grounded. You still communicate. You still express. You still clarify when clarity is needed. But you no longer plead. You no longer defend your existence. You no longer justify your healing. You no longer apologize for your boundaries. There is a sentence I believe everyone needs to internalize at some point in their life. I am not responsible for how you interpret my truth. This sentence is not an excuse to be careless. It is permission to stop carrying emotional labor that was never yours to begin with. Another truth, one that is uncomfortable but freeing. If someone constantly demands explanations from you, they are often not seeking understanding. They are seeking control. Control over your narrative. Control over your choices. Control over how much space you take up. And the more you explain, the more power you hand over. Silence, in contrast, is powerful. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of self-respect. Silence that says, "I know who I am." Silence that says, "I trust my decisions." Silence that says, "I do not need to convince you." This kind of silence is not empty. It is full of certainty. And certainty is calming not only to you, but to others. People sense it. They may not agree with you. They may not understand you. But they feel your steadiness. This steadiness changes the dynamic. You stop being reactive. You stop being defensive. You stop shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. And something remarkable happens. Your mind becomes quieter. The endless rehearsals stop. The internal arguments fade. The need to be validated loses its urgency. Because you are no longer living on trial. You are living in alignment. In my opinion, this is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. Peace does not come from being understood by everyone. Peace comes from understanding yourself so deeply that misunderstanding no longer shakes you. This kind of peace is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not need approval. It simply exists. And once you experience it, you realize how much energy you were wasting before trying to be seen instead of being real. I want to leave you with a reflection that is both practical and profound. Ask yourself this the next time you feel the urge to explain: am I sharing to connect, or am I explaining to be accepted? The answer will tell you everything. Because connection flows naturally. Acceptance demanded through explanation never lasts. When you stop explaining yourself, you don't lose your voice. You find it. And when your voice is rooted in truth instead of fear, it becomes steady, unshakable, free. That is the freedom that comes when you stop explaining yourself. And once you taste it, you will never want to go back. Part 8: Detaching without becoming cold. How to care deeply without losing yourself. One of the greatest fears people carry, often unconsciously, is that if they let go, they will stop caring. That detachment will turn them into someone distant, numb, or emotionally unavailable. That if they no longer cling, they will no longer love. I want to say this plainly, because this misunderstanding keeps countless people trapped in unnecessary suffering. Detachment does not make you cold. Attachment makes you desperate, and desperation is what slowly erodes love. I believe this confusion is one of the most painful emotional distortions of our time. We've been taught through stories, movies, and even well-meaning advice that intensity equals depth. That holding tightly proves commitment. That fear of loss is evidence of love. But in reality, fear does not deepen love. It contaminates it. When you are attached, you are not fully present. You are monitoring. You are calculating. You are protecting yourself from imagined loss. Detachment, on the other hand, is presence without panic. It allows you to care deeply without needing to control outcomes. To love fully without bargaining with reality. To remain open without collapsing when things change. This is not indifference. It is emotional maturity. I want to be very clear about something that I personally believe with conviction: attachment is not a measure of how much you love someone. It is a measure of how much you fear losing them. And fear always distorts perception. When fear enters a relationship, love becomes conditional. You start loving not for the joy of connection, but for the relief of reassurance. You stop asking, "How can I be present?" and start asking, "How do I make this stay?" This shift is subtle, but devastating. Because the moment you try to make love permanent, you turn it into pressure. Detachment removes that pressure. It does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop gripping. In Buddhism, detachment is often misunderstood as withdrawal from life. But true detachment is not withdrawal, it is freedom within engagement. You still feel. You still care. You still connect. But you no longer hinge your inner stability on how things unfold. And this is where love becomes clean. Clean love is not transactional. It is not anxious. It does not keep score. It flows. I've seen this difference clearly in real life. Attached people love with urgency. Detached people love with steadiness. Urgency demands. Steadiness allows. Urgency says, "Don't leave." Steadiness says, "Stay if you align." And here is the truth that many people resist, but eventually come to understand: anything that needs to be forced cannot remain healthy. Detachment teaches you how to let relationships breathe, to give space without fear, to allow silence without suspicion, to accept change without panic. This does not weaken bonds, it strengthens them. Because when you detach from outcomes, you start relating to people as they are, not as you need them to be. You stop projecting expectations. You stop imagining futures that don't exist yet. You stop clinging to versions of people that only live in your mind. You meet reality. And reality, while imperfect, is far more peaceful than fantasy. I want to share a belief that I've formed through observation and experience: attachment makes you needy. Detachment makes you generous. When you are attached, you give with strings. You give attention hoping for return. You give affection hoping it will secure loyalty. You give patience hoping it will prevent abandonment. This giving is exhausting. When you are detached, you give freely. Not because you are trying to earn something, but because giving itself feels aligned. And if it is not received in the way you hoped, you are disappointed but not destroyed. This distinction matters because disappointment is human. Destruction is optional. Detachment is what prevents disappointment from turning into devastation. Another important truth, one that deserves emphasis, is this: detachment does not mean you stop feeling pain when things end. It means pain no longer defines you. You can grieve without losing yourself. You can care without clinging. You can walk away without bitterness. In my opinion, this is one of the most powerful forms of strength a person can develop, because it allows you to stay open in a world that constantly changes. Many people close their hearts after being hurt. They mistake numbness for healing. They confuse emotional shutdown with detachment. This is not detachment. This is armor. And armor eventually isolates. True detachment does not close the heart. It stabilizes it. It allows emotions to pass through without taking over. It allows love to exist without ownership. It allows connection without captivity. There is a sentence that captures this perfectly: love is not possession. It is presence. Attachment tries to possess. Detachment learns how to be present without control. I want to speak honestly here, because this is often where people struggle the most. Detachment requires trust. Trust that you will be okay if things change. Trust that loss will not annihilate you. Trust that your worth is not dependent on someone staying. This trust does not come from positive thinking. It comes from inner work, from building emotional independence, from learning to sit with discomfort, from developing an inner home that does not collapse when someone leaves. Without that foundation, detachment feels terrifying. With it, detachment feels natural. This is why people who are emotionally grounded detach without effort. They are not trying to be detached. They simply do not cling because they do not need to. And that need or lack of it is felt by others. Attached energy feels heavy. Detached energy feels spacious. People often describe detached individuals as calm, secure, or confident. But what they are really sensing is emotional freedom. Freedom from fear-based attachment. Freedom from constant monitoring. Freedom from emotional bargaining. This freedom is deeply attractive, not because it tries to be, but because it allows others to be free as well. Detachment also sharpens discernment. When you are not attached, you see people more clearly. You stop making excuses for behavior that hurts you. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop tolerating emotional crumbs. Not because you are harsh, but because you are honest. Attachment clouds judgment. Detachment clears it. This clarity allows you to love wisely, to choose people who meet you in mutual respect, to step back from those who repeatedly disturb your peace, to walk away from dynamics that require you to betray yourself. And here is something I want to say directly, without softening it. If detaching from someone makes you feel like you are losing yourself, then attachment was never love. Love should expand you, not consume you. Detachment brings you back to center. It reminds you that you are whole on your own. That connection is a choice, not a requirement. That you are allowed to care without sacrificing your stability. This does not make you less loving. It makes your love sustainable. Because love that is rooted in fear burns out. Love that is rooted in freedom endures. I've noticed that people who practice detachment are often misunderstood. They are labeled as distant, as emotionally unavailable, as too independent. But what is often missed is that these individuals have simply learned how to regulate themselves. They do not need to grasp, because they trust their footing, and this trust changes how they experience endings. Endings are no longer failures. They are completions. Not every connection is meant to last forever. Some are meant to teach. Some are meant to accompany you for a season. Some are meant to show you who you are not. Attachment fights endings. Detachment honors them. It allows you to say goodbye without resentment, to release without erasing the love that existed, to move forward without dragging the past behind you. This is emotional freedom at its highest level. And yes, it takes courage. It takes courage to stop clinging, to stop controlling, to stop tying your identity to someone else's presence. But that courage is rewarded with peace, with clarity, with a deeper, steadier capacity to love. In my personal view, detachment is not something you practice for others. You practice it for yourself, so that your heart remains open without being fragile, so that your love remains deep without being dependent, so that your life remains grounded even as people come and go. Detachment does not reduce your capacity to love. It purifies it. It removes fear from the equation. It removes desperation from affection. It removes self-abandonment from connection. And what remains is something rare and powerful: love without chains, care without collapse, connection without loss of self. That is what it means to detach without becoming cold. And once you experience this way of being, you realize something quietly profound. You were never meant to hold anyone tightly. You were meant to hold yourself steady and let others walk beside you freely. Part 9. The day you stop needing people, you meet yourself. The version of you that exists without an audience. There is a version of you that almost no one has ever met. Not your friends, not your family, not the people who love you, not even the people who left you. It is the version of you that exists when no one is watching. No one is validating, no one is choosing, and no one is staying. Most people never meet this version of themselves, not because it doesn't exist, but because they are too busy reacting to the world to notice who they are beneath it. I believe this is one of the most important truths of inner growth. As long as you need people to feel worthy, you will never fully know who you are. You will only know who you become in response to others. When someone approves of you, you feel confident. When someone withdraws, you feel small. When someone stays, you feel safe. When someone leaves, you feel lost. Your identity becomes reactive. And a reactive identity is never stable. It is shaped by attention, by presence, by absence. It is constantly adjusting itself to maintain connection, to avoid loss, to preserve belonging. But none of that reveals your true self. It hides it. The true self does not emerge in applause. It emerges in quiet. It does not appear when you are chosen. It appears when you choose yourself. And this is why the moment you stop needing people is so uncomfortable and so transformative. Because when the need dissolves, the masks fall. You no longer have to be interesting to be seen. You no longer have to be agreeable to be accepted. You no longer have to be needed to feel valuable. And without those pressures, something unfamiliar appears. Space. Space to ask questions you avoided. Space to feel emotions without performing them. Space to notice who you are when you are not trying to be anything. At first, this space can feel terrifying, because many people have built their entire sense of self around being wanted. Wanted by a partner, wanted by a group, wanted by a role. When that wanting disappears, or when you no longer chase it, you are left with a question that cuts deeper than most are prepared for. If I am not being chosen, who am I? This question cannot be answered by thinking. It can only be answered by experience. By living without the constant need for external confirmation. By existing without an audience. By allowing yourself to be ordinary, quiet, unseen, and noticing that you still exist. This is where the real self begins to speak. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. You begin to notice preferences that are actually yours, not adopted to fit in. You begin to recognize values that don't need defending. You begin to feel a sense of direction that does not depend on approval. This is deeply unsettling for people who have spent years shaping themselves to be liked, because it means letting go of identities that once kept you safe. The good one, the strong one, the easy one, the needed one. These identities are not fake. They were survival strategies. But survival is not the same as living. And in my personal opinion, the hardest part of meeting your true self is grieving the versions of you that existed only to survive. Grieving the energy you spent pleasing. Grieving the boundaries you never set. Grieving the self you abandoned to stay connected. This grief is quiet, but real. And it must be felt, not rushed, if you want to move forward with integrity. Because the moment you stop needing people, you stop negotiating your identity. You no longer ask, who do I need to be loved? You start asking, who am I when I stop performing? And the answer is rarely dramatic. It is often simple. You are someone who values peace, someone who needs space, someone who doesn't want chaos disguised as passion, someone who prefers honesty over intensity. But these truths were drowned out when you were busy being needed. Here is something I want to say very clearly. Because many people misunderstand it, needing people is not the same as loving people. Needing comes from lack. Loving comes from fullness. When you stop needing people, you do not become isolated. You become honest. You stop pretending that certain connections fulfill you when they don't. You stop clinging to relationships that require you to abandon yourself. You stop romanticizing attention that costs you your peace. And in that honesty, you meet yourself. Not the version shaped by fear. Not the version shaped by expectation. But the version shaped by alignment. This version of you does not rush to fill silence. Does not panic at distance. Does not collapse when someone leaves. Because their sense of self is no longer outsourced. They are rooted. I have noticed that people who reach this stage often feel misunderstood at first. Friends may say, you've changed. Family may say, you're different. Others may say, you're more distant. But what is really happening is not distance. It is detachment from performance. You are no longer feeding dynamics that relied on your neediness. You are no longer reinforcing roles that depended on you being emotionally available at your own expense. And this can be uncomfortable for everyone involved. Because when you stop needing people, you stop being controllable. You no longer tolerate inconsistency for the sake of connection. You no longer chase effort that is not freely given. You no longer accept being an option while treating others as priorities. This is not arrogance. This is self-recognition. And self-recognition is powerful. It brings a kind of calm confidence that does not announce itself. A confidence that does not argue. A confidence that does not beg. You simply know who you are. And knowing who you are changes how you experience loneliness. Loneliness is no longer a threat. It becomes information. It tells you when you are out of alignment. It tells you when you are settling. It tells you when you are ignoring your own needs. But it no longer defines you. Because you have learned how to be with yourself. You have learned that silence does not erase you. That being alone does not diminish you. That your worth does not require witnesses. This is the moment many people describe as finally feeling real. Not happy all the time. Not healed completely. But real. Grounded in their own skin. In my opinion, this is one of the rarest achievements in modern life. Because it requires something most people avoid at all costs: inner independence. Inner independence does not mean rejecting connection. It means refusing to build your identity on it. It means you can enjoy closeness without fearing its loss. You can care deeply without dissolving into someone else. You can walk away without questioning your worth. And when you reach this place, relationships change. You no longer choose people to fill emptiness. You choose them because they add to your life. You stop chasing potential. You start responding to reality. You stop waiting to be chosen. You choose yourself first. This self-choice is not selfish. It is stabilizing. It ensures that no matter what happens externally, you remain intact internally. And here is the quiet truth that many people discover only after years of suffering. The people meant to walk with you do not require you to need them. They walk beside you because they want to, not because you are clinging, not because you are afraid to be alone. When you stop needing people, you stop attracting those who thrive on your dependence, and you begin to attract something different: mutual respect, emotional maturity, genuine presence. Not because you are trying to attract anything, but because you are no longer available for anything else. This is the paradox of inner freedom. The less you need, the more aligned your life becomes. And the more aligned your life becomes, the more you recognize yourself, not as someone who is completed by others, but as someone who was always whole and simply distracted. Meeting your true self is not a single moment. It is a gradual unveiling, one boundary at a time, one goodbye at a time, one moment of choosing peace over attachment. And once you meet this version of yourself, you realize something quietly profound. You were never afraid of being alone. You were afraid of meeting yourself without distractions. Now that you have, you understand why this meeting changes everything. Because when you stop needing people, you do not become empty. You become anchored. And an anchored person is no longer at the mercy of who stays or who leaves. They stand. They know. They are. Part 10: Becoming unbreakable in a world that constantly changes. Why inner independence is the ultimate freedom. There comes a point in life when you realize that nothing stays exactly as it is. People change. Roles shift. Relationships evolve. Plans unravel. Even the things you once trusted to be permanent quietly move on without asking for your permission. For many people, this realization is terrifying. For others, it becomes liberating. The difference lies in one question, one that quietly determines whether life will harden you or free you. Where does your stability come from? If your stability comes from people, circumstances, or outcomes, then change will always feel like a threat. Every loss will feel personal. Every ending will feel like a failure. Every shift will shake your sense of self. But if your stability comes from within, change becomes something else entirely. It becomes movement, not destruction. It becomes evolution, not abandonment. It becomes life doing what life has always done. In my honest opinion, this is the final threshold of inner growth. The moment you stop fearing loss, because you are no longer built on what can be taken away. Most people don't realize how deeply the fear of losing others controls them. They soften their boundaries to keep people comfortable. They tolerate disrespect to avoid being left. They silence their needs to maintain proximity. And they call it love. But fear-driven love is fragile. It is constantly negotiating with reality. It is always trying to secure what was never meant to be owned. I want to say this clearly, because it matters. The fear of losing people does not protect love. It poisons it. When you fear loss, you stop being present. You start performing. You begin shaping yourself around what you think will keep someone close. And slowly, piece by piece, you lose yourself. Becoming unbreakable does not mean you stop caring about people. It means you stop building your identity around their presence. This distinction is everything. An unbreakable person still feels pain, still grieves, still misses, still loves deeply. But their core does not collapse. They bend without shattering. They mourn without losing direction. They let go without self-betrayal. And this capacity does not come from toughness. It comes from inner independence. Inner independence is the quiet understanding that your peace does not belong to anyone else. That your worth is not a negotiation. That your identity is not a reflection of who stays or who leaves. This understanding changes how you experience endings. Endings no longer feel like verdicts on your value. They feel like conclusions to chapters that have run their course. And this perspective is powerful. Because once you stop fearing loss, you stop clinging. You stop forcing conversations that feel empty. You stop chasing clarity from people who offer confusion. You stop waiting for closure that only comes from within. You begin to trust something deeper. You trust that what is meant to stay will stay without you having to beg. You trust that what leaves was never meant to be held tightly. You trust that your life is not falling apart, it is rearranging. In my view, this trust is one of the highest forms of wisdom. It allows you to move through life with dignity. You no longer fight endings. You no longer cling to beginnings. You no longer measure your worth by permanence. You understand that everything meaningful is temporary, and that temporariness does not make it meaningless. This understanding brings a calm that is difficult to describe, a calm that is not dependent on reassurance, a calm that does not require constant validation, a calm that remains steady even when the world feels uncertain. This is what it means to be unbreakable. Not rigid, not closed, but rooted. Rooted in values rather than outcomes. Rooted in self-respect rather than approval. Rooted in awareness rather than fear. People who are rooted move differently. They do not rush to replace what they lose. They do not panic in silence. They do not fill every gap with noise. They allow space. And in that space, they listen. They listen to their intuition instead of external pressure. They listen to their body instead of expectations. They listen to their inner truth instead of the fear of being alone. This listening guides them. It helps them make decisions that are aligned rather than reactive. It helps them walk away without bitterness. It helps them stay without losing themselves. I believe this is why emotionally mature people appear calm even in chaos. They are not unaffected. They are anchored. And anchoring yourself internally is the most radical act of self-care you can commit to. Because once you are anchored, the world can no longer toss you around. Disappointment becomes manageable. Rejection becomes information, not identity. Change becomes movement, not catastrophe. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes honest. And honesty, while sometimes painful, is far less exhausting than fear. There is a sentence I return to often, because it captures the essence of this freedom. What is meant for me will not require me to abandon myself. When you truly believe this, your standards rise naturally. You stop accepting half-presence. You stop tolerating emotional chaos. You stop negotiating your peace. Not because you think you are better than others, but because you finally understand what it costs to betray yourself. This understanding changes how you love. You love without possession. You give without depletion. You stay without fear. You leave without guilt. And perhaps most importantly, you stop confusing intensity with depth. Depth is quiet. Depth is steady. Depth does not need drama to feel real. Unbreakable people understand this. They understand that the strongest connections are not the loudest ones, but the most aligned ones. That the most meaningful lives are not the busiest, but the most grounded. They understand that inner peace is not found by controlling the world, but by releasing the illusion that the world must behave a certain way for you to be okay. This release is not resignation. It is freedom. Freedom from overthinking. Freedom from emotional bargaining. Freedom from the constant fear that something essential will be taken from you. Because when your foundation is internal, Nothing essential can be taken. People may leave. Circumstances may change. Plans may dissolve. But you remain present, whole, capable. And this presence becomes your greatest strength. It allows you to face uncertainty with clarity instead of panic, to meet loss with grace instead of collapse, to move forward without dragging the past behind you. In my personal opinion, this is what Buddhism has been pointing to all along. Not detachment from life, but detachment from illusion. The illusion that someone else is responsible for your peace. The illusion that permanence equals security. The illusion that being unbroken means being untouched. Being unbreakable does not mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being ruled by fear. And when fear loosens its grip, something extraordinary takes its place. Confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet certainty that you will be okay, no matter what unfolds. This confidence does not need to prove itself. It does not need applause. It does not need to be seen. It simply exists. And once it exists, your life begins to change, not because the world becomes kinder, but because you become steadier. You stop living in anticipation of loss. You stop preparing for abandonment. You stop bracing yourself for disappointment. You live fully, honestly, presently. This is the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from pain, but freedom from being controlled by it. Not freedom from change, but freedom within it. Not freedom from relationships, but freedom from dependence. When you become unbreakable, you do not retreat from life. You meet it with open eyes, a grounded heart, and a self you no longer abandon. And in a world that constantly changes, that is the only stability that lasts. That is the strength no one can take from you. That is the quiet power of becoming whole from within. There is a quiet truth woven through every part of this journey, a truth that does not shout or demand attention, but patiently waits for you to notice it. You were never meant to build your life on what can leave. So much of our suffering comes from placing our sense of safety, worth, and identity in things that are fundamentally unstable: people, attention, approval, roles, and expectations. When those things change, as they always do, we feel as if something essential has been taken from us. But what was taken was never meant to be our foundation in the first place. Throughout this story, one message keeps returning in different forms. Real strength is not found in being surrounded, chosen, or constantly understood. Real strength is found in learning how to stand alone without feeling incomplete. When you stop needing people to feel whole, something profound happens. You do not become colder. You do not lose your ability to love. You do not withdraw from life. Instead, you become grounded. You begin to love without fear, connect without clinging, and face change without collapse. You stop asking the world to hold you together, and you discover that you are capable of holding yourself. Silence becomes less threatening. Solitude becomes a teacher instead of a punishment. Loss becomes a passage rather than a verdict. And slowly, quietly, you begin to build a life that is not easily shaken because it is rooted within you. This is not a journey toward isolation. It is a journey toward inner independence. And inner independence is what allows you to show up in the world with clarity, dignity, and peace. The deeper lesson from this story is simple, but not easy. You cannot control who stays, who leaves, or how life changes, but you can choose where your stability comes from. When your peace comes from within, relationships become healthier, not heavier. Love becomes freer, not fearful. Endings stop breaking you. Silence stops frightening you. You begin to choose people because they align with you, not because you need them to survive emotionally. How can you apply this in your life today? Practice being alone without immediately reaching for distraction. Notice where you rely on others to regulate your emotions. Strengthen your inner home through self-respect and boundaries. Learn to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. Replace clinging with clarity and fear with presence. These are not overnight changes. They are quiet practices that, over time, transform the way you experience yourself and the world. Now, I want to hear from you. What part of this message resonated most deeply with your own life? Do you believe emotional independence is strength, or do you see it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below so we can learn from one another. And if this reflection brought you clarity, calm, or a sense of understanding, please subscribe to Buddhism in every moment. Your support helps us continue creating honest, meaningful content that guides people back to themselves one moment at a time. Thank you for being here.